How about the fact that Mary of Magdala was the first to see the risen Lord? If they'd made up the story, being guys, when they had some woman see him first, and definitely as ancient Jewish men, absolutely not. The testimony of a woman in court was 9 times out of 10 excluded in those days. It was not considered to be valid testimony, except in very extreme, unusual circumstances. And yet here is Mary of Magdala, there, the first one who sees the risen Lord and testifies to it. How awesome. That's so awesome in a number of ways. Numerous appearances over 40 days to hundreds of people. I think it's pretty reliable. And I know that in my own life, I have seen the fruit of salvation in my life and in the lives of those around me, to know that, yeah, I can depend upon this. Now, as with any story, there's the main character, which of course is Jesus, died and rose from the dead. In this story, there are some supporting characters. Not that Jesus needed support, but supporting the story. And I want to take a quick look at 4 of them, because I think they speak something to us today when we consider the story of the resurrection. The first one is Barabbas. Remember Barabbas? He's the guy that got a free ride because they crucified Jesus instead. He's spoken about in all 4 Gospels, which is significant. That means it made an impression on all 4 of the Gospel writers, and they wanted to make sure that was a part of the story. He's variously described in the 4 Gospels as a robber, a murderer, responsible for a rebellion in Jerusalem, and as a notorious criminal. That was Barabbas. Think about Barabbas. Remember the story. Pontius Pilate, here's all the people. Pontius Pilate doesn't want to put Jesus to death, wants to just beat him, scourge him, and let him go. His wife's talking about weird dreams. He doesn't want to have any part with this guy. But the crowd's going nuts. No, crucify him, or you're no friend of Caesar. And he says, hey, wait. You guys got a custom. I let somebody go over the Passover. You want me to release this guy? And they go, no, give us Barabbas, this notorious criminal and murderer and leader of a great rebellion. His release was effected because of the death of Jesus. His freedom, his liberty came because Jesus died. In the same way that because Jesus died and rose again, we are delivered from the judgment we deserve. You see, that's what the cross is about. The cross is about the judgment of God being poured out upon His Son rather than upon us, though we don't deserve that free ride. Did you ever think about Simon of Cyrene? Simon of Cyrene. Say that 5 times real fast. No, not really. Simon is the guy, it says, who just happened to be coming from the country, because during Passover, everybody went to Jerusalem because it was the big feast. And here comes Simon. It says he was just coming out of the country. And Jesus, having been beaten, having been scourged, having been mocked, having a crown of thorns thrust into his forehead and his skull, bleeding. He cannot carry the crossbeam of the cross, weighs about 30 or 40 pounds, to the place where he would be crucified. He's not strong enough to carry it anymore. And so the Romans say, hey, you, buddy, come on. You're carrying this for him. And so he gathers it. It says he carries it. Now, if you look at the accounting in Luke, it says right after that, it says, after it speaks about Simon helping him, it says on the way to Golgotha, multitudes of people gathered around and were following Jesus to Golgotha, it says. Multitudes of his followers, it says. And of the women were there, and they were weeping and weeping. Jesus looked at them and said, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves. If this is what they do in the green, imagine what will happen to the dry wood. He's speaking about the destruction of Jerusalem that would happen just 40 years after that because of the rejection of Jesus. Can you imagine what was going through Simon's mind? He's coming for a celebration, Passover. Takes the wrong road. Is told by the Romans, hey, do this. And you don't argue with the Roman soldier. And then as he's carrying this, here's all these people coming and weeping. And I'm sure speaking about Jesus and the things that he had done. And I can imagine him carrying this crossbeam and wondering, who in the world is this guy? What is going on here? What does this mean? He would have been a Jew because otherwise he would have no reason to be coming to Jerusalem during the Passover. And so he had to be at least a somewhat devout Jew. It tells us he was the father of two people, which is very interesting. Why in this short story would they say, yeah, he had two kids, one named Rufus and one named Alexander? Well, it's interesting that Paul, when he says his greetings to all the people in Rome, says, oh, say hello to Rufus for me. It's interesting that there's a man named Alexander who the mob at Ephesus took out, the Jews pushed forward out. Say, oh, take Alexander. You see, I think that Simon probably stayed at the cross to see what's happening here. Something's going on. I think, especially because of the accounting of Rufus, I think Simon got saved. Whether he did or not, what happened was through the actions of evil men, Simon was confronted with the truth of Jesus Christ. Because of the actions of evil men, he was suddenly face to face with Jesus. There's some of you here this morning. And because of your particular life experiences, the way you came to Christ is through the actions of evil men, evil deeds, that cause you to come face to face with Jesus. I'm not saying Jesus brought those evil deeds upon you, but I'm saying in the midst of that, that's where he showed himself. People say, where was God on 9/11? I'll tell you where he was. He was down in New York City caring for those who were hurt and scared. He was there empowering people for months to dig through rubble to find body parts, little body parts, that had been there for weeks or months. God was there in the comforting and leading people to the place of comfort in the midst of tragedy. That's what God does. That's what Jesus does. And whether it is a tragedy of your memory, or whether it is something that you face today, either because you're holding on to it or because it's happening right now, I'm here to tell you, Jesus is in the midst of it. Jesus is not causing it. Jesus is the one who will bring comfort. And like Psalm 23 says, we'll walk you through the valley of the shadow of death so that you can do that with no fear. Not because things aren't bad, but because Jesus is there with you.